LoreWarrior Campaigns, The Battle for Luthien. First Skirmish, Scenario 3, The Dragon's Eyes. Excerpt from Mallory's History of the Clan Wars, Rice Willis and Drogan Publishing Company, on Antietam 3055. The ground battle phase of the Battle of Luthien was atypical of most clan invasions. Though the Smoke Jaguars landed in force, they did not commit a large number of units to the battle initially. For some reason, Sarkhan Worth held the bulk of his forces back, thus allowing the Kuritan and mercenary forces sufficient time to marshal their troops. Some have speculated that Worth was waiting for the tardy Nova Cats to ground before launching his assault. A Combine recon patrol under the command of Shosa Shin Yodama initiated the first exchange of fire in the ground battle. Yodama's patrol was one of several that made their way out into the Tairakana Plains in an attempt to locate the main clan invasion force. Elementals or light omnimechs destroyed many of these patrols, but several still penetrated the enemy's perimeter and sent back valuable data on the invading force. Perhaps the most valuable information of all was a description of an omnimech design never seen in the Inner Sphere. Situation: Tairakana Plains, Luthien, 0500 hours, 5th of January 3052. In an attempt to gain the information normally learned in the Bachal, Theodore Kurita dispatched several reconnaissance patrols to the clan landing zones on Tairakana Plains. The data these patrols acquired helped the Khanrei tailor his defensive plans to maximize the effect of his forces. Scenario 4, Trojan Horses. Beware of Greeks. Excerpt from the personal journal of Gunso C. A. Homnik, Senior Tech, 1st Otomo Battalion. I wasn't sure whether Taisa Hideyoshi had gone completely around the bend when he asked me what it would take to arm a bunch of industrial mechs. In fact, I'm still not entirely certain. I told him we could rig up a dozen or so of the biggest loader mechs. We had plenty of armor plate lying around the repair yard, and weapons weren't a problem either because we'd just changed the Otomo's old weapons for the upgrades the Dragoons had given us. I was a little concerned for the pilots though. At best they'd be piloting, 20-ton machines with 1 or 2 weapons, tinfoil for armor and a top speed of around 25 kph. He told me pilots wouldn't be an issue. The Khanrei, he said, wanted to use dressed up loaders as decoys to lure the clanners into a minefield. The machines would be remotes. That made me feel a lot better, honestly. We improved on the Khanrei's idea a little by dressing up the loaders' armor sheeting to make them kind of look like archers and thunderbolts. We even packed several remotes full of C-96, turning them into walking bombs. Too bad I've got to stay back at the base during the fighting. I'd sure like to see the clanners' reactions to our little surprise. Situation: Tairakana Plains, Luthien, 0715 hours, 5th of January 3052. The ground battle for Imperial City began when the Jaguar Guards launched their attack against the 3 Kuritan regiments drawn up along the shores of Basin Lake. The invaders opened the battle with long-range fire, but charged quickly into close combat range and into the Khanrei's first trap. Closing with what they believed were Otomo mechs, the clanners discovered vibra bombs peppering the ground in front of the Combine unit's position. Then they discovered that the Otomo mechs were actually jury-rigged drones, many of which were booby-trapped. As the Jaguars staggered from the effects of the mines and Q-mechs, the genuine Otomo entered the fray. Their sudden charge, coupled with the havoc wrought by the minefield, brought the Jaguars to a halt. Scenario 5, Swordplay. Parry and Riposte. Excerpt from Blood in the Sand, The Battle of Luthien by James O'Sullivan, Cavalier Press and Robinson, 3054. As the Otomo, backed up by the 2nd Legion of Vega, slashed into the Smoke Jaguar's flank, the spearhead units of the invaders' column ran into the first Sword of Light. Trinary Alpha, the elite shock unit of the 1st Jaguar Guard, struck the first sword line near its centre, attempting to breach the entire Kurita formation. The swords stood fast, however, stalling the assault. The battle might have ended there, with the Otomo and Legion of Vega pressing in from the north, if not for the arrival of the Nova Cats. The Cats, supported by their own and Smoke Jaguar aerospace fighters, then smashed a hole through the first sword's line. The Combine defenders began collapsing eastward, leaving the way to Imperial City open to the clans. Situation: Tairakana Plains, Luthien, 0845, January 5th, 3052. The Canray's trap had bogged down the Smoke Jaguar's first probing attack on Combine lines, but then Trinary Alpha of the 1st Jaguar Guards struck the centre of the Combine defensive position, hoping to smash through the first Sword of Light and give the clans a clear road into Imperial City. The sword lines held for near an hour against the ferocious assault of the Jaguar Guards. Then, reinforced by the Otomo and the 2nd Legion of Vega, they began forcing the invaders back. This resistance was broken in turn by the arrival of clan reinforcements, supported by Jaguar and Nova Cat aerospace strikes. The Wave Breaks. Scenario 6. Cat's Claws. Excerpt from The Dragon and the Cat, A History of the Draconis Combine in the Clan Invasion by Mitchell Parker, Buckminster Publishing, 3055. Shortly after the Jaguars broke through the first Sword of Light's line, they ran into a second line of mechs from the unit. As the Smoke Jaguars thrust stalled a second time, the Otomo and the 2nd Legion of Vega smashed into the invaders' northern flank as the Genyosha struck the clan's southern flank. The Genyosha charged so fiercely they trampled several lighter clan mechs into the mud before their unfortunate pilots could react. One of these machines was so deeply embedded in the earth that salvage crews had to bring in heavy excavation equipment before they could free it. After opening the Koshi's cockpit, the recovery team discovered its pilot had died of a broken neck, probably received when a Genyosha marauder had swept the smaller machine aside as it closed with the light mech's larger cousins. The fate of the Koshi characterized the fighting alongside the entire southern flank, where the Genyosha slashed into the Smoke Jaguars, inflicting heavy damage and fading away before the clans could properly respond. Situation: Tyrracana Plains, Luthien, 0915 hours, 5th of January, 3052. As the Smoke Jaguars ran into the first Sword of Light's second line, the Otomo, the 2nd Legion of Vega, and the Genyosha launched the first all-out assault on the invaders. The Genyosha inflicted terrible damage on the Jaguars, folding the invaders' right flank back on itself. As the invaders turned to face the Genyosha, they siphoned a portion of their strength away from the 1st, and the Otomo and then the 2nd Legion of Vega. Defeat seemed certain for the invaders, but then the Jaguars and Nova Cats consolidated their force and pushed through the Combine defenders for a second time. And so we have the end of the next set of the battle. This is on Tyrracana Plains on the outskirts of Imperial City. We have a battle that starts at 5 in the morning and ends roughly just after 9:15, so just over 4 hours of continued conflict. The early parts of the battle see the Kuritan defenders attempting to discover where exactly the clans have landed and what their composition is of their forces. So in the first scenario, which was scenario 3, known as First Skirmish, we have the clans once again on the defenders side of it. They are, in this first scenario, the 1st Jaguar Guards cluster. We have elements of their security battle mech star consisting of 2 pilots, Mech Warrior Certain and Mech Warrior Corliss, one piloting a Arctic Cheetah, or Hankyu, and the other one in a Koshi Delta variant. We then also have a security binary of elementals, the first point of 5 elementals with their point leader, Elemental Star Captain Harbin, and all elementals armed with SRMs. The second point is another 5 point of elementals with Elemental Point Commander Valeska. They are also armed with SRMs and carry machine guns as primary weapons. The attackers, on the other hand, are actually some infantry. We have First Squad with Commander Shosa Shin Yodama as part of his combat patrol section. We also have another squad of 4 men with Shoko T. Stankowski, and a third squad of another 4 men of Shoko Lesra Marbury. So this is an interesting one because this is a group of Skulker wheeled scout vehicles, and then you've got these 3 squads of 4. So you've got 12 men taking on 2 elementals, 2 points of elementals, and 2 Omnimechs, essentially. A very difficult setup there, obviously. There's also a 4th squad, so you've got 16 men with Shoko Russell Eng as the leader. Each of them are equipped with a Skulker, a wheeled scout tank, not a particularly powerful vehicle, but I suppose a group of armoured cars are definitely something you want to be in more than being out on foot, especially against elementals. Another interesting little setup. It's not getting straight into the mech combat idea, and you've got, again, I'm not going to show the map or anything like that, or talk about the victory conditions, special rules, any of those kind of things. But you've got an interesting little setup. There's some artwork that goes to these, which are probably what I've got on screen at this point, that was created in the Luthien book, and these little battle images are quite fun. The second scenario was Trojan horses, which is where the Kuritans are setting up little traps for the attackers, and in this case we switch over to the Kuritans now being the defenders in the scenario. This is the first time. So that's consisting of Company A, 1st Battalion, with Taisa Oda Hideyoshi in its Battlemaster, Shosa Minamida Yosuke in an Awesome, Tai Kasugai Chisei in an Orion, and Tai Suzuki Hitoshi in a Marauder. They have a Heavy Lance with that, with Tai Gyochu in a Warhammer, Chui Imazeki Shobo in an Archer, David Lin in a Thunderbolt, and Emmett Casey in a Crusader. Guess they didn't have any ranks to give those guys. The medium lance also consists of Chewie Mason Omata in a Wolverine, Shulko James Huff in a Shadowhawk, Pat Borgen in a Wolf Trap, and Otto Reuter in a Phoenix Hawk. They, however, are facing off against quite the Trinary Assault group. The Command Star alone consists of Star Colonel Frayne in a Daiichi, Mech Warrior Marva in a Vulture, Mech Warrior Nelson in a Mad Cat, Mech Warrior Train in a Loki, and Mech Warrior Velika in a Ryoken. Bravo Assault Star with Star Captain Kisen or Kaizen in a Manowar, Mech Warrior Olva in a Thor, Mech Warrior Justa in a Nobori Nin B or Huntsman, Mech Warrior Xena in a Loki, and Mech Warrior Silas in a Black Hawk. Finally, we have the Charlie Assault Star with Star Captain Millen in a Mad Cat Bravo configuration, Mech Warrior Nissa in a Mad Cat Alpha configuration, Mech Warrior Under in a Vulture, Mech Warrior Theodore in a Ryoken, and Mech Warrior Carlo in a Ryoken C variant. Elements of a Trinary Assault Elemental Star also consist of Elemental Star Captain Ulatar Shradak with 4 Elementals. Quite the force, but of course we have to remember that these defenders in this scenario are going up against these clanners, but they've got the minefield and they've got the decoys, which was an interesting little scenario there, and there's a whole bunch of special rules concerning the Q-mechs, as they're called, with their stats and armor and stuff. So the actual Q-mechs themselves do weigh about 20 tons, as the write-up says. They have a walk of 2 and a run of 3, and they actually have heat sinks and all the rest of it, and depending on what kind of configuration they can have like different weapons and stuff. So yeah, they themselves can actually throw in, as a remote control mech, can actually throw in some damage. It's an interesting one. The first scenario was Swordplay, which saw the first sort of combined assault there of the Jaguars and the Novacats, I believe, getting involved. This is another rather large battle, obviously, with the defenders now consisting of the 1st Sword of Light, Company A of 1st Battalion with their Command Lance with Taisa Shigeru Yoshida in a Cyclops, Shosa Harafa Thin in a Stalker, Tai Saigan Tezuka in a Marauder, and Tai Michael Lee in an Archer. The Strike Lance with Tai Andrew Mikhailich in a Warhammer, Guncho Per Elson in a Quick Draw, with Dennis Rink in a Rifleman, and Larry Kasea in a Griffin. Fire Lance with Chewie Shigen Ozawa in an Archer, Norman Haniwa in an Archer, Sandy Dunbar in a Crusader, and Keith Conn in a Thunderbolt, with the elements of the 1st Sword of Light Aerospace Wing, Alpha Flight with Tai KK Block in a Shylone, and Chewie Tomio Saidan in a Shylone, and a Bravo Flight with Tai Kaolin in a Shologar, and Chewie Sam LaMonica in a Shologar. Meanwhile, the attackers comprise elements of the 1st Jaguar Guards Cluster and the 119th Nova Cat Striker Cluster. Binary Charlie of the 1st Jaguar Guards includes Alpha Striker Star with Star Colonel Blaine Raddick in his Masakari, Mech Warrior Beryl in a Mad Cat Bravo, Mech Warrior Trig in a Thor, Mech Warrior Slade in a Loki Alpha, and Mech Warrior Hendon in a Loki. Bravo Striker Star as Captain Thyra in a Vulture A, Mech Warrior Gage in a Black Hawk, Mech Warrior Spencer in a Ryoken, Mech Warrior Juhas in a Ryoken C, and Mech Warrior Lewis in a Puma B variant. Finally, we have elements of Rogue Fighter Star with Star Captain Hayden in a Batu Alpha, Pilot Nolan in a Batu, Pilot Gemma in a Bashgir, and Pilot Osred in a Bashgir A. And rounding all that out, we have elements of Trinary Striker 119th Nova Cat Striker Cluster with Charlie Striker Star with Star Captain Maya Worth in a Vulture, Star Captain Matthew in a Ryoken, Mech Warrior Revel in a Fenris Alpha, Mech Warrior Wanda in an Ulla, and Mech Warrior Ogden in a Koshi B. Whew. And then finally the wave breaks. Obviously that previous scenario, scenario 5, is just on the outskirts of the city as the defenders are desperately trying to hold up the assaults to allow more of their reinforcements to get into flanking positions, while scenario 6 is where those flanking attacks actually come into effect. In this scenario, the clans are now reversed and back on the defensive, as the defenders comprise the 5th Jaguar regular cluster. Their trinary battle, including Alpha Battlestar with Star Colonel Beaumont in his Man of War Bravo, Mech Warrior Dala and a Mad Cat, Mech Warrior Reese and a Thor, Mech Warrior Lawford and a Loki, and Mech Warrior Grim and an Obori Nin. Bravo Battlestar is led by Star Captain Freed in a Vulture, Mech Warrior Aaron in a Thor B, Levin in a Vulture, Waro in a Loki, and Antes in a Fenris, and Charlie Battlestar with Star Captain Javia in a Ryokan, Mech Warrior Nicholas in a Ryokan C, Mech Warrior Kunai in a Black Hawk B, and Mech Warrior Rogar in a Puma, and Mech Warrior Evan in a Hankyu Alpha. There's binary elementals of Alpha Star led by Star Colonel Quinn, and Bravo Elemental Star with Star Captain Coiler. The attackers, on the other hand, comprise elements of the 1st Genyosha, with their command lance of Company A 1st Battalion with Taisa Narimasa Asano in his Warhammer, Shosa Miyamoto Goro in a Hatamoto Chi, Chui Suni Makai in a Battlemaster, and Chui Kimberly Eshi in a Marauder. The attack lance consists of Tai Hohiro Chise in a Guillotine, Shoko Martin Fox in an Orion, John Licata in a Grand Dragon, and Davis Marie in a Wolverine. The combat lance rounds us out with Tai Honda Jiro in an Ostrok, Shoko Heshem Ish in a Thunderbolt, Arthur Segnef in a Kintaro, and Carl Bayani in a Shadowhawk. Elements of Charlie Company of the 1st Battalion have a heavy lance, led by Chewie Samuel Chin in his Crusader, with Paul Lincoln in a Thunderbolt, Carlos Hewitt in a Grasshopper, and Bob Fontaine in a Griffin. And that rounds out the Battle of Tyracana Plains. A lot of different forces, a lot of different mechs, but what it also highlights in this scenario is a case of the clans ending up in a very typical approach by the Smoke Jaguars, literally just throwing in lots of heavy weaponry in their mix of heavy and assault omnimechs to basically just sweep aside as many of the defenders as possible and storm straight toward the objective. Ultimately, it's the tactics that would lead the Smoke Jaguars into defeat on Tukiyid, as they basically try to apply the exact same mindset to, from what I can tell, every single battle. It worked for them up until this point, so why not, I guess. Unfortunately, this also leads to scenarios where they fall into easily laid traps. You can imagine that the Inner Sphere fighting this kind of battle, that if it was the Federated Sons of the Lyran Commonwealth, would probably be more aware of the fact that it's likely that the Kuritans defending Luthien would be pulling out all the stops, doing things like laying minefields, setting traps, using decoys. These kind of things would be expected, but the clans don't have that kind of experience. Even after a few years of already invading the Inner Sphere and having to deal with uprisings and the such, they still don't seem to have any adaptation to this kind of tactic. The Nova Cats may have been a little more canny had they been the ones in charge of the invasion, as they're obviously far less aggressive and a bit more contemplative with the way that they approach battle, but since they're not, they're forced into a scenario where they're basically having to play catch-up or work as support elements for the Smoke Jaguar forces, and it's clear that as this goes on, the Nova Cats are having to either come in to bail them out more often or not in the early parts of the battle, or work in these sort of head-on assaults, which are probably costing them vital equipment and warriors as it's going along, whereas the Kuritans, with their mindset being very much deployed around hit-and-run tactics and, if need be, sacrificial assault just to do as much damage as humanly possible, that's what they're going to do, and the clans just aren't set up for this kind of fight. But that was about the Tyracana Plains, as we next go into the actual battle for Imperial City, which does get quite interesting as we get into some of the combined arms sort of battles that go on there, as the clanners start to push deeper and deeper into the actual city centre, and yeah, the fighting gets pretty nasty from that point on. But thanks for listening, as always. I will catch you in the next one. I hope these parts have been interesting for you with the scenarios. They, as I said, the write-ups aren't quite as in-depth, or sadly as narratively sort of characterised as they were with the LoreWarrior campaign book, but unfortunately this is what they have for probably one of the most pivotal battles of the invasion era for Battletech. I mean, outside of Tukiyid, this is one of those key sort of battles that kind of sets the ball rolling for ultimately the end of the invasion. So yeah, that's all I got on that one. So have a good one. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll catch you for the next one. Bye bye now. Bye.